Senator Bill Hagerty joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Senator, thank you very much for joining us. And obviously, the first question out of the box is going to be your thoughts on what is going on in the House. House Republicans, no matter which way you voted, you're getting slammed by some portion of the conservative movement. Kevin McCarthy voted out by ultimately 8 Republicans, 8 conservatives. Now we have, of course, all of this criticism of the House Republicans. It's all chaos and everything else going on in the House of Representatives. What's your perspective on all of this?
Dan, the media loves to portray the Democrat Party as calm and capable, and somehow the Republican Party is the party of chaos. Well, let me tell you, it just happens to be that the Republican Party does this in the open. We don't hide it. But if I could take you back to the previous Congress, you think about when Chuck Schumer set up the leadership back in the last Congress, there must have been an incredible tug of war and fight. What set of circumstances can you imagine led to Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, as the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee? You think that wasn't a brutal fight? It just wasn't unfolding in the media, but that's one of the most nonsensical positions I've ever seen. What we saw here was, I think Kevin McCarthy had agreed to this motion to vacate by one person, 5 people could put him out. That's a very tough set of circumstances under which to operate. And now you've got a process going on to replace him. And Steve Scalise has put his name in the arena. Jim Jordan's name is in the arena. There may be more. I think this will be resolved fairly quickly. I can work very well with whoever they choose. Certainly the names that have been floated, I have a good relationship with them. I work great with our congressional delegation here in Tennessee, and I see no reason why we won't be able to work with whomever the leadership happens to be once this process is over. But I don't think it'll take too long.
It is interesting because you have Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan, 2 very strong conservatives. Kevin McCarthy, he went in, and I believe that he went in weakened. And so I think that he just, quite frankly, didn't have a chance because he was a marked man from day one. But do you believe that we'll see a different result from a Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan leading the Republicans in the House versus what Kevin McCarthy brought to the table?
Well, if we could focus the results specifically on the next stopgap bill that's likely to come up, because we've only got a little over 40 days to get government funding resolved. They're going to try to move through appropriation bills. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. We have moved all 12 of our bills through the Senate side, but we haven't yet put them on the floor, thanks to Chuck Schumer and the way he manages things. What we're trying to avoid, I think anybody that wins the speakership is going to try to avoid what they call an omnibus package, Dan, which is just one of these massive 4,000-page bills. They give you 36 hours to read it. None of us want that. So whomever they elect to be speaker, I think the very first initiative is going to be focusing on that, trying to avoid the omnibus, to chop this thing up into pieces where members can actually go in and try to put conservative policies in place. If we don't, we're going to allow the Biden administration to shove something, really, really ugly through. And I tell you, just looking at the language that they sent through, the Biden administration sent through, as their proposal to keep a, quote, clean continuing resolution in place moving forward in this last September 30th debacle, on page 51, I found language there that if you read it carefully, it allows them to, quote, reprogram the entire budget of ICE. That's the only law enforcement agency we have that deports criminal aliens from the United States. They wanted the ability to defund that and turn it into a resettlement agency to more rapidly process people into the interior of our country. That's what we have to watch out for. That's what these omnibus packages will deliver. And so I think that the next speaker is going to do everything they can. They must to avoid that type of situation.
Well, you and I, Senator, have talked about how when you and I and people listening, when we look at our budget and things that we need to cut because interest rates are high, inflation is high, and gasoline prices are high. And so, we look at individual parts of our income and the things that we have as expenditures. That's the way you have to look at these things. The fact that the government has such a bizarre way of passing these funding bills with these omnibus spending bills, it is just nonsensical. And I believe, and you just touched on it or hit it out of the park, this is how they sneak this kind of crap in. So I'm glad that you caught that. Now let's talk about the border. In the news today, this was breaking news overnight. Apparently now Joe Biden is going to, and Alejandro Mayorkas, now apparently the border is not secure, and they want to build parts of the border wall in Texas using Trump funds from 2019. I mean, just yesterday they were telling us that the border was secure, so I'm a little confused.
Yeah, here's where they're on that. I found those Trump funds. They were frozen by the Biden administration via an executive order. There was $1.7 billion in that bucket. What we also found out, we wanted to reprogram that. That's one of the things I worked on leading up to the September 30th extension. And I told my colleagues I will not vote for an extension of federal funding without serious border, without serious border policy in it, without serious funding. They wouldn't do it. I didn't vote for it. But I'm going to continue to work on it. But one of the things I found was that bucket of money. And I think the Biden administration now knows that I've got my sights on that. They want to get in front of this and take the lead. I think the thing that really concerns Joe Biden is the fact that he has, Democrat leaders like Mayor Eric Adams in New York talking about, or at least positioning for a potential presidential bid, saying that this is destroying New York City, the bastion of leftism. When you've got that happening in your own party, I think Biden is feeling very, very, very uncomfortable. So I think what they're trying to do is, quote, get the narrative changed again. That's the way they talk in Washington. Try to get ahead of this and to try to put some small amount of money toward border security. It's got to be serious. I've yet to see anything come out of the Mayorkas Department of Homeland Security that's even close to serious. So you can imagine I'm quite skeptical about this.
You touched upon that CR over the weekend. Yourself, Senator Marsha Blackburn, also voting against that CR. One of 9 Republicans, Ted Cruz, Mike Braun, and others also voting no. When you talk about, because what you said on Twitter and so forth, and you just mentioned, it's about border security. So what specifics do you want to see in any kind of spending package that you want as far as border security goes for you to be comfortable in voting for a continuing resolution? What do you want to see on the border?
What I want to see is, broadly speaking, at 30,000 feet, Dan, significant progress in the right direction. That means rehiring, beginning to hire again, actual law enforcement officers. That means hiring ICE officers, not reprogramming their funds like the Biden administration wants to do to make them a welcome wagon for people to welcome into the country, but actually to enforce. Putting money on border enforcement, putting real boots on the ground at the border, going back to, and I mentioned this in the last segment, reprogramming those dollars that Biden froze, getting them back to building a border wall, true border security at the southern border. That's what I want to see. Some of my colleagues criticize the fact that, well, it's only a continuing resolution, which means it's only going to be happening for 45 or 47 days. Can you make real progress there? The answer is absolutely. If you start sending the message back to our border patrol, our ICE agents, that we support them again, that we're going to start funding them, they start actually hiring people and delivering real results, we'll have data that will help us continue to make this argument, because that's what we need to have happen down there at the border. We've seen it work before. There are elements of this that are going to be harder to do, but I think very much worth fighting for. That's undoing some of the policy recommendations, going back to the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump put in place that was so successful, not allowing people to transit from a third country into America. They can only stop at the next country that they stop in. They can't come through a third country to get to us. Those sorts of things will dramatically reduce the flow immediately. Those are policy changes. We'll be pushing for those as well. But what I've been focused on is the most pragmatic way to get as much done as possible through the process of this appropriations vehicle. And it's not easy to do, but we've been putting the work in. Again, I didn't get enough of my colleagues to go along with me last time. I'm going to keep pushing on it this time, and hopefully we can get it done.
I got to ask, as we wrap this up, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is leading a, quote, bipartisan congressional delegation to China. Why are we going to China? And you know that nobody's going to ask the tough questions from whoever they meet with, Xi Jinping or whoever, about the fentanyl coming across our southern border, coming from China. I mean, we could go on and on about COVID, their cooperation with the World Health Organization and the investigations into the origins of COVID. What's the point of going to China?
Well, it's something that I cautioned Chuck Schumer against doing very, very, very clearly. I think I'm the only person, Dan, that the former diplomat, as you know, I was the U.S. ambassador to Japan. And it's very clear to me that what we're doing is feeding into the Chinese propaganda machine. I have somebody that translates the Mandarin language press releases that the Chinese government puts out. We've now had 4 cabinet members consecutively visit China, basically kowtowing to China. They've sent no one back in return. Under proper diplomatic protocol, it should be tit for tat. They've sent nobody back here. We're basically going and kneeling at their altar, and they are propagandizing that throughout China. To have the Senate Majority Leader go over there and do this without getting anything in return, it's a wasted opportunity to get something accomplished because they're not extracting any sort of concession. And also, it's an embarrassment to America, yet again, on the world stage. This administration is pushing Chuck Schumer to do it, I believe. I don't know that for a fact, but I've got to believe this was at the request of the White House. It seems that the saying about Joe Biden is true. Every opportunity that Joe Biden has had to make a decision on national security and on foreign relations, he's taken the wrong tack, and this is another case in point.
Thank you very much for joining us, Senator Bill Hagerty on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Always great to have you on. Looking forward to having you again on soon. 7:51 now on WTN.